Gatu sat in his small, dimly lit apartment, his hands trembling slightly as he pressed them against his stomach, feeling the life growing inside him. Every movement sent a sharp pang through his body, a reminder of how dangerous this pregnancy was for an omega without a mate, without an alpha. He tried to focus on the warmth of the child, the tiny flutter of life that he had protected with every ounce of his will. But the world outside his door was not silent. There were forces at play, forces he had always feared, and one of them was about to strike in the most unexpected way. The doorbell rang sharply, echoing through the quiet apartment. Gao Tu froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Visitors were rare, almost non-existent, and he had been careful, painfully careful, not to let anyone know where he was hiding. Yet here it was, the sound of intrusion, and a premonition of dread settled heavily on his chest. Reluctantly, he stood, supporting himself on the edge of the couch, and moved toward the door. His hand trembled as he opened it, only to find his father standing there, eyes sharp, face unreadable. Gao Tu's breath caught. His father, who had always been a figure of authority and control, now radiated an unyielding determination that made Gao Tu's stomach tighten, not from the pregnancy alone, but from the sense that his life was about to shift irreversibly. Without a word, his father stepped inside, his gaze immediately landing on Gao Tu's midsection. The silence stretched uncomfortably, thick with unspoken knowledge. "I know," his father said finally, voice low but firm. "I know about the child." Gao Tu's heart stopped, fear and shock mingling into a bitter taste at the back of his throat. What do you mean?" he managed to whisper, voice cracking. His father's eyes, hard and calculating, didn't waver. "Gao Tu, you are carrying Wenling's child, aren't you?" Gao Tu's lips parted in disbelief. He had known this day could come, had feared it for weeks, but hearing it spoken aloud, so bluntly, felt like a physical blow. The conversation turned immediately into negotiation, the way his father always spoke, measured, commanding, cold. "Listen carefully," his father said, stepping closer, each word deliberate. "If Wenling wants to keep this child, if he is truly concerned, then he must act. 10 million. That is the price. 10 million. And I will ensure the child is terminated safely." Without hesitation, without question, Gao Tu's chest tightened painfully. He could barely comprehend the cruelty, the cold calculation. How could his father, how could anyone attempt to commodify the life growing inside him? And yet, he knew that this was not just a threat. It was a reality in a world where alpha, beta, and omega politics dictated lives, but there was more to it. His father's words hinted at his understanding of Wenling's nature. Or at least the version of Wenling he had always known. "You know Wenling," his father continued, voice dripping with certainty. "He despises omegas. He would never take responsibility. He would never care. That is why the price is set. 10 million, Gao Tu, and the child can disappear." Every word was like a knife, slicing through Gao Tu's fragile composure. He had long feared Wenling's rejection, had lived for years with the secret of his omega nature, had hidden the very essence of himself to remain close to the man he loved silently. And now, with the child's life hanging in the balance, the fear that Wenling would turn away loomed like a shadow threatening to consume him. Gao Tu's father paused, allowing the weight of the offer to settle in the room like dust. The apartment, small and dim, seemed suddenly suffocating. Gao Tu's mind raced, heart pounding, each breath shallow and rapid. "And if he refuses?" Gao Tu asked, voice trembling. His father's gaze was sharp, almost predatory. "Then the child will live, yes. But you, Gao Tu, you will have to protect it. You will have to endure, because Wenling will never claim responsibility willingly. That is your reality. But if he agrees, the choice is his, and I will ensure the child is gone." Gao Tu felt his knees weaken, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The life he carried, the child of the man he had loved for over 10 years, was suddenly reduced to a bargaining chip in a cruel game he had no control over. The next hours were a storm of emotion and thought. Gao Tu tried to steady his breathing, to calm the racing panic in his chest. He thought of Wenling, of the man who had never fully seen him, who had never acknowledged the depth of his devotion. Could Wenling ever accept this child, this tangible proof of the love and life they shared in secrecy? Could he overcome the prejudice, the fear,
the societal expectation that Omegas were disposable, and embrace the child and Gao Tu with open arms?
The questions tore at him, mixing with pain from the pregnancy, exhaustion from the constant strain, and the overwhelming fear that even this one moment could change everything.
Gao Tu's father, meanwhile, watched him carefully.
"You must make a choice, Gao Tu," he said finally, voice softer, almost pleading, but the menace beneath it remained. "Do you trust Wenling? Can you rely on him to do the right thing, or must I intervene for the child's sake?" Gao Tu's eyes welled with tears, emotions threatening to spill over. The child inside him moved, a small, urgent flutter that seemed to echo his own heartbeat, a silent plea for protection and survival. Gao Tu bent down slightly, hands resting over his stomach, whispering softly, "I will protect you. No matter what happens, I will not let anyone take you away." And so, the night stretched endlessly, filled with uncertainty, fear, and the unspoken hope that somewhere, somehow, Wenling would make the choice Gao Tu had longed to hear. Would he step forward, claim the child, and finally acknowledge the silent, unwavering love Gao Tu had carried for over a decade? Or would the cruelty of circumstance and misunderstanding tear them apart forever? Gao Tu could not know, could not control the outcome. All he could do was endure, protect, and hope that love, silent, secret, and unwavering, would be enough to survive the storm that had just begun. The next morning, Gao Tu awoke with a dull ache pressing across his abdomen. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind, every word of his father's ultimatum echoing in his ears. He sat on the edge of his bed, wrapping his arms around himself, feeling the weight of the child he had promised to protect. It was not only the physical strain that threatened to overwhelm him, but the emotional burden of knowing that someone he loved, Wenling, might reject both him and the child. Fear gnawed at him, a relentless predator that refused to be ignored. But alongside the fear was determination. He had always been strong, or at least he had always presented the world with the illusion of strength, and now he had to truly embody it. Every decision, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. He had to protect his child, and he had to survive. The thought of Wenling occupied his mind constantly. Gao Tu remembered the countless moments they had shared in secret. The subtle glances, the faint smiles, the quiet acts of care that Wenling had never fully acknowledged as love. He remembered the nights he had spent alone, silently watching Wenling from afar, cherishing every interaction, every fragment of attention as if it were a treasure. Now the stakes had shifted. The child growing within him was undeniable proof of a bond that had never been spoken aloud but had existed, steadfast and true, in the shadows for over a decade. The child represented hope, continuity, and love, the very essence of the life Gao Tu had silently devoted himself to protecting. Suddenly, the door opened again, and Gao Tu froze. He had not expected anyone so soon, especially not under the weight of last night's revelations. But it was Wenling. The man's presence filled the small apartment like sunlight breaking through clouds, and Gao Tu's chest tightened with anticipation and fear. Wenling's expression was unreadable, a perfect mask of calm, though the sharpness in his eyes betrayed his underlying tension. "I know," Wenling said quietly, almost too softly to hear. Gao Tu's breath caught. He had expected anger, rejection, confusion. But this quiet acknowledgement left him trembling. You know? Gao Tu whispered, voice quivering. Wenling nodded, but said nothing else, letting the silence stretch, thick with meaning and unspoken words. Every second of that silence felt like an eternity. Gao Tu's mind raced with questions. How much did Wenling know? Would he reject the child? Would he reject him? And yet, beneath the fear, a small, fragile hope began to bloom. Wenling's presence was a comfort, even in uncertainty. Gao Tu could feel it. could sense it in the way Wenling's gaze lingered on him for a fraction longer than necessary, in the way his body seemed to radiate a quiet intensity. He did not yet know the depth of Wenling's feelings, but for the first time in months, Gao Tu allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the man he had loved silently for over 10 years might finally acknowledge the bond that had always existed between them. But reality was unyielding. The danger of his pregnancy was never far from his mind. Gao Tu had always known that carrying a child as an omega without a mate, without an alpha to stabilize him, was perilous. Each day was a calculated risk, every movement a potential threat.